Hey guys, I'm Daniel from Doldier Media, and today I'm going to be talking about if you should become a travel RT or not. So me personally, I'm not a travel RT, never did that, and I never want to do that. But I do want to give you guys some pros and cons from what I've experienced working with a lot of travel RTs, and maybe this is something that you do want to do, maybe it's something that you never want to do in your life. So if you become an RT, you typically get a job at a hospital. When you work at a hospital, you're pretty much committed for 10, 20 years, whatever the time is that you're going to be working there. When you're working there, you have a set schedule, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week. You come into your shifts, then you go home. You don't usually work at other hospitals. There are opportunities for you to work like at a clinic or like at a sleep lab while also working your job, but you pretty much stuck in that hospital. A travel RT, on the other hand, what they get to do is they get to sign contracts to go to assignments in other states, cities, or sometimes even countries. It all kind of depends on what your contract is and what you specify to the third party that you're working for. So you're no longer going to be working for an actual hospital, but you're going to be working for a company that kind of manages RTs, and it sends them out to hospitals they have contracts with. The organization that sends you to hospitals is called the travel agency. So what happens is, if there's like a high demand in a state, let's say there's a COVID surge in Florida or Mississippi or whatever state it is, the hospitals there are going to be so understaffed that they're going to pay a high premium just to get more people in for a short period of time. And when you come in, you typically sign a contract for 8 weeks or 13 weeks. So it's usually, what I've seen in my experience was that it's been mostly 3 months. So about 12, 13 week contracts. And what happens after those 13 weeks or 12 weeks are up, or whatever the contract is you sign up for, you get to either extend the contract if they still need you. You also get to sometimes negotiate how much you get paid. There's some people that get paid a little bit more. Sometimes they can't actually pay you as much because no longer it's a crisis or whatever it is. So you get to negotiate a little bit, or you get to go to a different travel assignment. And I know people that only work travel assignments locally within like a 50-mile radius of where they live. And I know other people that travel all the way from New York to California or vice versa. So these are the pros of being a travel RT. After I state the pros, I'm going to state the cons and kind of the reason why I would never be a travel RT. Even though it's not too bad of a job, I would never want to do that. Pro number one, you actually get paid a lot of money. Travel RTs are really high in demand, and so they're willing to pay a premium just to get you there for a short period of time. On top of that, you get a stipend pay, you get paid to stay in an apartment. Sometimes you get like $1,400 a month extra. Some places give $2,000 a month. So it all kind of depends on where you're working, but just for staying somewhere, you get an extra amount of pay. Some places pay you extra for the traveling every day. So like for drive, for gas. So this is on top of you getting paid for being an RT. You're also getting paid for staying somewhere. You're getting paid for your hotel or your rent or whatever you're doing. And on top of that, if there's a crisis or an emergency, you're sometimes getting double the pay or whatever it might be. So I do know a lot of RTs that were getting paid over $100 an hour during the crisis that we just recently had. If money is one of the reasons that you want to become an RT, even though that's probably a bad reason to become an RT, but if that is something that drives you, then travel RT work is going to be good because you get probably the most bang for your buck. You also don't commit for too long. So 12 weeks you're in a place, and within another 12 weeks you go to another place. So that's probably the best pro they have. Pro number two, you get to travel. I know a lot of travel nurses and RTs that I'm working with currently at the hospital, and they're from all over the United States. So it's kind of cool. You get to talk to people from New York, from Ohio, from Florida, Mississippi, and they get to stay in Northern California, go to Napa Valley, go to San Francisco, and kind of just travel around the coast. And within 2-3 months, they're going to be traveling in another place, like in Seattle, and exploring the area there. So if traveling is something that you like and you're not really tied down because you don't really have like kids or a wife, then honestly it's pretty good. You get to travel and get paid to travel. So pro number three is you get to pick up skills in places that you normally wouldn't expect to pick up skills. What I've learned is that people on the East Coast, people in the South, and people on the West Coast do medical practice very differently. It's almost like somebody's coming from another country. So sometimes like people like to hold different medication dosages. People on the East Coast have different standards than people on the West Coast. So what's kind of cool is you get to see how medicine is done in another place. And when you're traveling as an RT or even as a nurse or whatever profession you're traveling as, you get to see how your job is done in another area, and you become a much better therapist just because you pick up a lot of things that people that stay in your city or your town don't necessarily know. But because you've traveled a lot of places and saw what other people do, you become well-rounded. Another pro for being a travel RT is that you don't necessarily have to pay taxes in the state you work in, but in the state you live in. So let's say you live in Florida where they have zero income tax, and you work in a place like California for a few weeks where you have a 13% tax rate, then you're gonna have to get taxed at your level in your state. So it's a big pro. Now that works the opposite way. If you live in California and you travel somewhere else, then you're kind of getting the short end of the stick in that situation. And the last pro for being a travel RT is probably going to be the fact that you do not have to commit to a hospital. What's cool is when you're a travel RT, you get to see other hospitals, you get to go to different areas of a hospital, and you get to really see what you want to do. So let's say you just started off, you're about a year in, you have a year experience, and you start traveling and you thought you wanted to work in the ICU, and it turns out you don't want to work in the ICU. That's something that you could pick up as a travel RT without having to commit or make yourself look bad at a hospital. So while working as a travel RT, you'll see things, and then in front of the management, you'll probably not see them again. You can still work hard and press them, but when you're applying back home, nobody really knows what you did or what you didn't do, if that makes any sense. So it's like a trial run at a job. So that's kind of a pro in my opinion, even though it also kind of works as a negative. Now on to the cons, the reason I wouldn't become one, and I think the overwhelming weighted reason why people should not become an RT. If those first few reasons entice you to do it, then definitely do it. Here are the cons though. So first con is they want a lot of experience. Now, it's funny because they have hired people that I personally seen that did not have the experience that they needed. So typically they want 1 or 2 years of experience at a travel agency. Now, let's say you go to a travel agency and you worked like at a skilled nursing facility, or you worked on the floors for 2 years. That doesn't necessarily mean you have the experience to work in an ICU setting or any other kind of crazy settings like an emergency room. So with that being said, you might get thrown into the lions then, and you might not be able to handle it. People think they can handle it, but when they get thrown into a situation where they're kind of overwhelmed, it becomes very difficult, and you're going to be sitting struggling at the new job for 13 weeks or whatever your commitment is. And that might be a little too much for you. Honestly, that might be too much, and you're in a contract, so you can't break it. Sometimes you have to pay to break it, and it just kind of puts you in a really, really bad place. So most people aren't ready for the type of work they'll do as a travel RT. Even though you've been working for 5-10 years at your hospital, that doesn't mean you're ready to work in another place, in another environment. Con number 2, and probably the biggest reason why I wouldn't become a travel RT, is you get thrown into the worst situations. Now, it's not the hospital's fault. It's also not really, it's just the way it is. As a travel assignment, you're the least, not valuable, but you're the least known person to the department. They don't really have a loyalty to you. When the supervisors or managers or whoever does the assignment, they'll probably give you the worst assignment. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be getting a worse assignment in terms of how much workload you have, but you're probably going to get the assignment that is least desirable in the department. Now, I've seen a lot of people get thrown into an assignment that it's not necessarily too much to handle. It's definitely manageable, but it's so tedious, I guess you could say, that it gets a little bit overwhelming for a lot of the travel RTs. And I've seen this time and time again at multiple hospitals. This is across the board. From the many travel RTs and nurses I've talked to, this is a very common thing. So let's say there's a really, really critical patient that everybody's kind of overwhelmed with, like in the ICU with nurses. If you're a travel nurse, for example, you're probably going to get that critical assignment and maybe even an assignment on top of that. It's just the way it is. It's not that you're not valuable to them, but it's just that there's no loyalty established just because you're there for a short time, and you're getting paid a lot of money to do a lot of hard work. So you better be prepared to work that shift, work that assignment. You're kind of more qualified in a sense because you're a crisis traveler, or you're put there for emergency situations. So a lot is expected from you. The reason I wouldn't do it is, like I was saying, you're just going to be thrown into a situation where a lot is expected of you. And when a lot is expected of you, there's a lot of stress involved in that. And it's not always going to be a tough assignment. Sometimes it's just going to be a very critical patient that you're going to be having to deal with. And it is what it is. A lot of the people that I personally worked with, they have to work with a lot of COVID patients because that's kind of what they're there for. They came out to help with the pandemic. And because of that, you're kind of stuck working with only COVID patients. And it's very difficult managing COVID patients. They're really, really sick, especially if they're in a hospital. And my final con for being a travel RT, or at least not being one, is probably going to be the fact that you're not given enough time to learn the way the hospital does things. So when you're a new employee at a hospital, some places give you 2 weeks, some places give you up to a month or two just to learn how they do things. Every doctor likes to do things a specific way. It takes a few years just to learn how the doctors like it, what the protocols are, what the hospital likes. Every hospital system is different. If you're thrown into a hospital system that does things a very specific way and specific doctors want things their way, you're not going to learn that in 13 weeks. So for 13 weeks, you're just going to be catching up or doing the wrong thing. So you're constantly risking not only your license, but your credibility and also your livelihood. So it's kind of like, yes, you do get thrown into a situation where you get paid a lot of money, you get to pick up a lot of experience, but you might mess up because a hospital might have a strict protocol where RTs don't do that, and you don't really ask the question because your hospital never had that protocol. And so you did it, and then you can get in trouble for that. That's something that's always, I guess, on the back of your mind as a travel RT or a travel nurse, is that you're constantly catching up to what everybody else around you already knows because they've been there for a long time. Overall, if you have any questions, let me know what your questions are about travel work. I've never done it, so I won't be able to actually answer any specific questions about it. I just talked to a lot of people who've done it, and I've kind of got their opinions on this matter. I've had a lot of questions about travel work on my comments, and that's kind of why I'm addressing it. Instead of individually addressing each comment, I just made a video about it. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.